fun to listen along. And we're live. So we've decided to just talk a little bit around something that is more structured. And today we decided that we wanted to touch on the root center. And when I say we, it was mostly me, and then I dragged Laura into it. So she's being a good sport in the whole thing. And, we're still going to do it in our very right-minded way, which is we haven't prepared. But yeah, we're going to try and put a little structure around what we usually talk about. So hope you guys like listening to stuff about the root. Okay, so I'm thinking about where to start with the root. I've been thinking about the root insofar as it relates to, and let me just share my screen now. Insofar as it relates to health, but I'm wondering, Laura, if there's anything that you want to say kind of like as an opening, like any opening comments you want to talk about, or even if there's anything that's been happening with you, because one of the things that I want to talk about with when we go through the centers is like how they show up for us in our lives. And me and you are interesting because we both have opposite. I have defined, you have undefined, so we're both going to come at it from a unique perspective.
We can start off by telling people what the root center is in case there's like absolute newbies with us. Hello, if you're an absolute newbie, hopefully you're not because we get into the nitty-gritty here. But um, the root center is one of the four pressure centers. It is one of the two, no, one of the four motor centers, one of the two pressure centers. The head and the root being the two pressures, the motors being the heart slash ego, sacral, solar plexus, and root. And so it's pressure and motor, pressurized energy to like do stuff in life. And somewhere I came across the phrase that it's like the pressure to evolve or to not necessarily to survive, because that's on the splenic side, but it's the pressure to evolve or to continue evolving. And I feel like that, I don't know, is like a very nuanced way of looking at the root. Has nine gates. A lot of it is in Capricorn, some of it's in Cancer as well. A lot of opposites. If you look at the location of these gates, like 58. And what's the opposite of 58? 18. Just kidding. Not, no, is it? No, maybe not. 58, 18 is the channel. Oh, what's the opposite of 58? I can't
Yeah.
remember right now, but like 54, 53 are opposing each other on the mandala. 54 is in Capricorn, 53 is in Cancer. Um, 58, 52, there we go. 58, 52 is
Okay.
that
I'd have to
opposition.
look it up.
What other oppositions? I don't know. I can't think of them off the top of my head. 38, 39, which we have right now
Yes.
defined with the
Yes.
sun and earth. Those are in opposition. So a lot of Cancer Capricorn energies, which you can really see the Capricorn in the root center, the drive, the cardinal energy. I mean, Cancer is also cardinal, but the cardinal energy we have to go and get stuff done. Um, yeah, that's my really right-minded summary for you of what the root center is. The pressure motor center. That's all you need to know.
Well, and I think to also add in, there's also only because of my own root definition, there's the Aquarius of it too, the Aquarius of
That
the
too, yeah.
root. But it is very there's a primordial quality to it in a sense, and just to speak on when we are developing in the womb, I believe it goes that first the throat comes, then the G center, then the ego, then the spleen, and then the root, which is interesting because it's not primary, even though a lot of what we do in this life is dependent on our root being like having the energy to be able to do things can be very like root dependent, and a lot of times we use the energy of the root center to get things done, maybe when we're in our not self, we're kind of like using the pressure there to move in the world instead of our own authority. And so it's not listed as one of the top three most conditioning factors or forces as far as centers go, but it certainly can be super conditioning nonetheless.
Yeah, as someone with an undefined spleen who lives with three defined spleens, I mean, root centers. Oh boy, just forewarning, Sarah knows, but like my nervous system, which is like ironic, speaking of the root center and pressure, has been shot today. So I may be a bit frazzled and not coherent and using wrong words like I just did. So I'm a defined or an undefined root living with three defined roots. So it's a constant pressure. And let's just clarify that when you have an open or undefined center, you are taking it in and amplifying it and distorting it, not unlike a guitar amp or musical instrument amp, where if you blast it to like full volume, it does not sound pretty whatsoever. It's just like it's frazzled. So much like myself right now. So just yeah, letting you know that if you have an undefined root and you're amplifying, like that is not, I mean, it can be a healthy pressure, but it's not necessarily a clear, clean frequency of pressure.
Yeah, important, definitely important to say. And I was listening to Martin Grassinger talk about the root, and he said that coffee is like the not self, it's like the not self of open root center people, because it has a lot to do with basically cortisol and adrenaline. Um, Part of the gates that are in the root center are associated with the adrenals themselves. And we have, in a normal physical response, there's a kind of waking up factor that we get when we're waking up in the morning. And when we're excited about something, we get an excitability that comes over us. This center also, actually, from his perspective, has to do with joy and joyousness in general, but like more of the joy, what is it, joie de vivre, like the joy of life, not because of any particular things that are happening, just like a kind of general gratitude and joy for being alive. And when we're able to operate correctly as ourselves, that energy can come out in healthy ways. But living in the material world, in the Maya that we live in, oftentimes what is, I guess you could say, an adrenalized excitement or joy turns into anxiety, turns into cortisol, turns into nervousness. It mixes with the mind, and the mind is telling the root center to, it's not telling the root center specifically, but the mind is saying something, and then our body responds to it with adrenaline. But typically the root center is, if we're looking at the hexagrams, which I'm wondering if I should pull them up right now. The root center has hexagrams primarily in it, where part of the structure, the bottom structure, is the lake and the mountain. And so it's really about stillness and then what rises up out of the stillness. And there's nuances to each specific gate. But, we kind of, I guess you could say, bastardize the energy of the root, because we put so much pressure on ourselves in this society to be a specific way or to do things in a specific way. We live off of coffee. We basically adrenalize ourselves in the morning, and then we depress ourselves in the evening with alcohol or something of the like to be able to make it through. And when I say we, I'm using that term very generalized, because me and Laura don't do that. We both,
Well,
we're
you
not
can
we're not
speak for
involved
yourself.
we're not involved with the 9 to 5, though, kind of structured reality where like people feel like the pressure, the homogenized pressure to do things in a specific way. Not to say that we don't do not self-root things, but we don't do it in the homogenized way. We do it in our own little, not self ways. But yeah, so that's just a few things. And like Laura was saying, she has an open one, so she does amplify those around her. I have a defined root, and so I have my own energy that is constantly flowing within me. It's emotional, because it's connected to my emotional center. So like an emotionally adrenalized energy that is natural to me, but that right now it's interesting. And part of the reason that I'm glad that we're talking about the root is I have really a clinically high cortisol situation going on in my physical body. And one of the things that Martin Grassinger said as well was that, again, the adrenaline that we get from the root is a natural response to just like being alive and the rhythm of life and the joy of life. And and the 15th gate, I think, is the only other gate that has either the lake or the mountain as the first trigram in it. And so there's a quality of I might be mistaking this. All right, I'm not going to talk about the 15th gate right now, but nonetheless, when you over or under or misuse the energy that you get from the root center, you end up in a situation where you have chronic cortisol, which is chronic stress. Because the center is actually like, we're not really supposed to use its energy unless it's coming to us from our own authority or our own physical, like not mental response to things. And because we're all so mental, the mind has kind of gotten into cahoots with our root, and it's overactivating our root center. So it's active more often than it should be. At least that was his perspective. And it made a lot of sense for me too, because I have adrenal problems and and that has everything to do with the root. And it's because of being stressed out for so long and over long periods of time. Do you want to say anything about that, Lora?
Yeah, well, I like talking about the endocrine system, so I can go into
Yeah,
the
yeah,
scientific details about that. But something
yeah.
that first comes to mind is the statement that the root center is not an authority. It can't be an authority. It can connect to an authority and be the powerhouse that perhaps give that authority movement and credibility. But it in and of itself can't be an authority, which I think is fascinating because so many people, myself included, previously have made decisions based on pressure of like trying to get free of something, like thinking like, okay, like you have this pressure on your shoulders and you need some sort of resolution. Your mind, your not self mind needs some sort of resolution. And so you're going to try to think of like, what can I possibly do to get through this fast or to resolve this? And we use pressure and stress to define what it is that we do with our lives, and we allow it to make decisions for us in cahoots with our mental state. Which, I mean, unless you're a mental projector, like you shouldn't be using your mind to make decisions. And even then, like they soundboard to come to internal clarity on what is correct for them. So like the root, like the pressure centers are not our authority, and yet they really, really control the world around us and how most people kind of make decisions about their lives.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point too, because it can feel so easy in today's world to kind of have the root and the head, which we'll talk about on another day, co-opt our energy or, basically feel like it is a source of our, the necessary source of our decision making and the need to get rid of pressure, the need to stop thinking about something. They can really run roughshod over our lives. And something else that was said when I was listening to Martin was that if basically the root basically should be calm, like I was saying, it doesn't need to be activated all the time, even for people who have definition there. But if the root is misfiring, then it overpowers everything else. Basically, to say if we are in fight or flight, then there's every other thing, every other decision that we make is kind of overtaken by that pressure. And it's a necessary evolutionary step for us to have access to this kind of adrenaline, cortisol, things like that in case of emergencies, but we've overused it. Our not selves have created situations where we've overused it, and the not self culture. So yeah, it's if you want to talk about the endocrine system too, it's like the adrenals are connected to the pituitary, and so you're getting, no matter what, this feedback loop. Well, all of the systems are connected to each other in some way, but there's always a feedback loop going on that can really overpower the vehicle so that you're not actually able to you know, check in with your authority, at least in that particular state of affairs. So yeah, Laura, do you want to talk about the endocrine system a little?
I do, but I want to say something else first. I guess I don't want to talk about it, not yet, at least, not with my mind. Um, but just thinking about the root center, because you said the pressure to evolve or something along those lines. Like if you look at the pathways of the root, like the root moves towards the spleen, I just cannot talk today, which is the pressure to survive, the spleens, and to like build up immunity to things around us to be able to survive when shit hits the fan with like disease coming in and like wiping out a population or COVID or things like that. That sort of pressure. But like again, it's nuanced. Like 58's the joy of life, 38 is the the fighter,
Fighter.
like knowing what to fight for individually for yourself, and 54 is tribal. But like the root connects to a lot of different pathways, and that 54 is part of the material way. So it's part of the tribal pressure to survive materially um in the world, which like today has evolved to like people having money and people having ambition to make money. 54 is a Capricornian energy. So it's interesting to think about the different layers of the root in that way. And it's not just about, fight or flight in terms of the body having a internal physiological response. Like it shows up in actuality and reality in ways like, oh, do you have ambition to pursue goals in a concrete way to like move forward in life and have goals that you succeed at, things like that. But that's like very also generalized way of interpreting that. And then we have the route towards the sacral center, which are formatting energies that kind of like dictate how we move through life. If you have a format energy, are you fixed in the individual, not fixed, but like are you rooted, root center rooted in the individual methodology of like needing to mutate with a pulse and having the melancholy that like, oh, mutation's not there, or the abstract, like having cycles and experiences, or the logical finding patterns and repeating them. And then on the other side, we have the root that moves towards the solar plexus, which are sexual energies. It's sexual drive. Like we have sexual, the reproductive capacity, which is in the sacral center. We have like the desire for sexual experiences, which is in the solar plexus. And we have the drive, which is in the root center. So like that's also a part of it. So it's interesting. And then like we have things like the 1949, which deals with the bride and groom, like the tribal pressure to couple with someone and to make family bonds and tribal bonds in that way. So the root center is really complex when you look at like the nitty-gritty bits and pieces of it. But again, going back to that physiological thing, it's like super interesting because we have adrenal glands that sit atop our kidneys, and they produce various different hormones. One is aldosterone, which controls our blood volume via controlling how much sodium is in our system and how much we're excreting through our kidneys. Um, and that also has like a biofeedback loop, both with the hypothalamus and pituitary glands, as well as with the lungs and liver and a bunch of other organs, which is like, again, it's all interwoven and interconnected. So it's like interesting to think about the physiology side of human design, because you can't really have things within a vacuum. Everything, like your entire body is doing, I don't know how many different hundreds of thousands of enzymatic functions all at once that you're not controlling, you're not in charge of, and they're all working harmoniously with one another and sending communications to one another. So you can't really look at things in that vacuum of just like the adrenals are just in the root center, because there's so many other pathways that kind of connect to the adrenal function. But it's also producing cortisol, which the signal that tells cortisol to increase or decrease is blood sugar levels. And that connects to our digestion, which is kind of in the solar plexus. And it produces norepinephrine and epinephrine, which is like the fight or flight response. Cortisol is like with our long-term stress. And it also produces, again, the sexual drive, libido, androgens, and different sex hormones. And so like there's all these different bits and pieces, which we do see in the physiology as well as in the body graph. But again, it's not a vacuum. So it's, yeah, interesting to think about.
Yeah, no, it's actually the interesting thing, and this is gonna tie everything you just said together too, is the 38th gate is actually the only gate that has to do with the fight or flight response, which makes so much sense. because
Because
the
it's the
38th,
fighter.
yeah, because it's like literally the individual need to preserve the individual integrity of the unit of the self, right? So that is when it can be for running from a bear, but it can also be like you needing to fight somebody who's trying to impede on your own individual integrity. That may come out as well. And I have this gate twice, and it's my fifth line gate, so it made so much more sense too, that like, oh, okay, I not only do I have this gate twice, it also is projected onto me, that I have it because it's in the fifth line for both places. But then the other interesting thing is that the 58th, the 54th, the 53rd, the 52nd gates and the 39th gate are all related to basically like different ways of joy and stillness. And there's a lot more nuanced ways to get into that, but that's where, there's a natural pressure, like Laura was saying. Maybe it's a tribal pressure, maybe it's a individual pressure. Um, Whatever the pressure is, like there's a kind of a natural joy that also is associated with it. And it's interesting because the 60th and the 19th gate have to do with gratitude. And I was thinking about this in terms of the 60th gate having to do with limitation, because I have the 60th gate as my north node. And for the 60th gate, dealing with gratitude, that was never something that I considered until I heard him talking about it. And it makes sense though, because within our own limitations, like that's where our lives are able to take shape. And like the ability to have gratitude for those lives that are taking shape is kind of like it transcends the limitation in and of itself, like that. It's we almost have to like love our limits, because otherwise we would just be an amorphous blob floating around in the universe. And so it was just an interesting thing to think about. And then for the 41st gate, this is the gate of detoxification. And the other ones, when I was speaking of them, they each have their own amino acids. So that's how he was pairing them. I'm not going to get into the amino acids because I don't know them well enough and I don't understand them well enough. Um, but the 38th gate has its own amino acid. The 41st gate has its own amino acid. That's why the 38th one has to do specifically with fight or flight. And the 41 is specific to detox, which again, I have the 41st gate. And it was interesting for me to understand this because detoxification is the point in which something is externalized or emoted or pushed out. And we think about the 41st gate all the time as the start code on because it is, but it's kind of like there has to be something that happened prior to it that like pushed that final thing out of the soil and into the or you could say that pushed the seed outside of itself, cracked the seed open, and now it's in a sense emoting, or it is externalized as opposed to just being internal. And it also speaks to me because I'm currently detoxifying, and I'm like, oh, okay, that also makes sense. Alakanon Diaz, when I was getting my reading with him, said that the 3041 had to do with fasting. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out why that was, because it's such a desirous like gate, and channel. Like it's, it feels so wanty and so hungry all the time, at least internally to me, that thinking about it in terms of fasting didn't really make sense, but it does in terms of detox, the detoxification process that comes out again from the root, and the pressure to literally expel something. So it's like we have the pressure to externalize our joy in different multifaceted ways. We have the pressure to externalize like the gratitude for just being alive. We have the pressure to fight for our integrity of our individual self. And then there's the pressure to detoxify or push out things that are either no longer serving us, or that are, it's time to push them out because of the cycles of life. So I thought that was interesting too, just in terms of like the differentiation between the gates, and the fact that Laura was just talking about the fact that it is not just fight or flight, because it's not. Like the root is actually a really, spontaneously fun kind of place to be when when it's when it's healthy, when it's a healthy root and it's not just totally been co-opted by the not self stuff, which is basically in my own deconditioning journey. I'm like that. This is where I've come to realizing that my root has been in a basically chronic state for a very long time and trying to detoxify it. So, yeah, I guess wish me luck on that, you guys.
Um, Another random thing that comes to mind more on the endocrinology part as a result of everything you said is that because of the nuance of the root, like thinking about cortisol, part of cortisol's function is to suppress the immune system. So it's suppressing the spleen. Like, isn't that weird to think about? Because you have your spleen that's supposed to be there to respond to immunology stuff, to pathogens and viruses. And then you have cortisol, like your root is saying, again, it feels like the fight or not necessarily the fight or flight stuff because it's more cortisol, but it's the root saying, like, here's a correct stress. Like, this is a stressor that we have to get to first before we can allow the spleen to do its function and like clear out the pathogens. We have to respond to the mental stress first of like whatever it is that's causing us to be disruptive internally. So yeah, it's interesting to think about. I feel like that's my catchphrase today. It's interesting to think about this. It's interesting to think about that.
It's always
Um,
interesting to think about things when you have the 1156, okay?
yeah, but then like also Sarah talking about her hunger and like detox, I'm just like can't relate with my undefined spleen. I have gate 19 and 54 and 38 as like the hanging gates in my route. And so I was thinking about it before we came on today of just like how does that interact with my family members that I live with? Um, how does it compromise specifically? Because my mother has the 54-32, so I compromise to her, and I'm pretty sure my brother has the 38-28, so I compromise to him. But like my dad has 39-55, so I don't compromise to my dad's root energy. It's more of like that's his dominance, and I can see it in him, and it's not net quote unquote not necessarily impacting me in the compromising way. But like in actuality, like it's not fun to deal with any of their root pressures. Um, and I was thinking about how like the only ever time I lived alone was like one semester in college. And half that year I lived with my sister, and then she studied abroad, so I was left by myself for the other semester. And I can't remember how I did with like stress and my root. And like the other 3 years of college, I lived with the same. And I probably was like not 6 feet apart from the other people living in my teeny tiny apartment building. So I probably wasn't like fully in my own aura when I slept. But the other years, I lived with the same roommate. And she has an undefined root, and I don't think we hooked up roots either. So like it was kind of a similar flavor, but like she has other motors. So that would impact me and like my experience of her. But again, it's so hard to think back to those times because here and now I'm constantly exposed to root energy and it's not fun. Like I don't like the root center defined. I would prefer to just be by myself and not deal with anything. And like if my body wants to be productive and do something at home, it can most easily do so when no one's here. But as soon as someone's home, I just become stressed. Just like having their pressure center near me just makes the task that I'm doing stressful. And it's not like anything changed about the task. It's not like I had to finish it faster or slower, but all of a sudden, like, oh, like that energy is there, like, get it done as quickly as possible so you don't have to be in this energy. So you can go and be at peace in your own aura and not have to deal with it. And it's like they're just standing there. They're not doing anything. They're not commenting on anything that I'm doing. And yet it's a very visceral thing. And I like to think about before when I would like do readings for people, I would compare the root center to like train tracks or a train on a track. Like it has coal inside that engine for that train to be able to get from point A to point B. Like it can't go to a gas station in the middle of its journey. It needs to have as much energy that it needs in order to get to where it's going to go. And it has a consistent pathway of where it's going. Whereas like an open route is like a sailboat in the middle of the ocean. It's dependent on external energy, on a sail, on wind. Like if there's no wind, you're not going anywhere and you're stuck. And you just have to wait to see like where that spontaneous energy when it comes in will take you, like with transits or with other motors. But there's no pressure inherently within the boat to get anywhere. But like when you're a person in the boat, you don't want to be stuck in the middle of the ocean. So there's a lot of surrender that happens with the open route, because you have to surrender to the fact that like sometimes you won't get anywhere. Sometimes you won't do anything. Sometimes there's no pressure to get anywhere. And it's nice when you can accept it and you like feel content and peaceful in it. But again, when that not self mind comes in and says like, oh no, you have to do something, it just it's the fuel of the fire. Like it tries to get you to do something without you actually having the energy to be able to do the thing. So then it becomes the mental pressure of like, you have to do this thing, but your body is unable to complete that task. And then it's just really uncomfortable. So that's my little spiel on having an undefined root center.
The not self mind is a real SOB, man. Like it really is. And I feel like, you can't underestimate it, because it's not just that it is telling you things, it's literally messing with your chemistry, like on a fundamental level. So yeah, I just respect, like respect to it. Like, and in deconditioning, this is not like you aren't just deconditioning from thoughts, you're deconditioning from chemistries in your body that are used to being produced because of your typical responses historically to things and your habits and things like that. And listening to you talk, it's funny because I'm living with two completely open, not completely, but two open root people. So undefined roots. They do have, I think, some definition, both of them in the root center, but not anything that's creating a channel. And what I've noticed is that, first of all, like they can't not get something done when it's being asked of them, when the thing is needed, or when they find out that they need to do something, immediately they're off to the races, and then they're going back and forth with each other about, oh, we need to do this now, this needs to get done now, and then whatever else they were doing, be damned, basically. And they're both not self, they're both mostly still pretty unconscious about their human design. Um, but be damned about, waiting or holding out, or any of that stuff, because it's like they can't stop themselves, or they can't stop the habit or the pressure that gets created there, because they do define each other's root. But it's interesting too, because then they'll try and put that pressure on me, who's a defined root, for things that have nothing to do with me. And I'm like a rock in a lot of cases. It does still affect me though, like on a stress level, when they're trying to get something done that isn't correct. Like it isn't correct for my defined route to be doing in that moment, and they want me to be involved with it. And one of them creates, or one of them, uh actually both of them connect to my root, either in a channel or in a compromise, or electromagnetic or in a compromise. I think both of them are electromagnetic though, and at least in one case, and there's a compromise, I think, in another case. But the pressure that they have, that they don't even understand that they can wait, like it doesn't even clock, it's like it doesn't even register in their brains that they can not do this right now. Then it gets transferred on to me, and then I'm like, wait, we don't need to do this right now, do we? Like, do we really need to? And I have to have that conversation. And one of the most frustrating definitions for me is the 2838 with someone that I live with, because they want, even though they're undefined, they want to be up close with me, because it's like that energy of struggle of getting something done, and like my stress and the cortisol response that I get from the adrenaline, like I'm like, I need to do this alone, like you need to back up. So it's interesting that it's not just, and I think that we're discovering this through the conversation, that defined roots affect undefined roots and amplify the definition, but also undefined roots will affect defined roots too, depending on the electromagnetics and the connections that are there. And certainly, like if we're out walking somewhere, they probably walk faster because I'm there, or vice, they may try and speed up at least to keep up with me, instead of just being like, okay, I can go at my own pace. And this is all happening subconsciously, so it's not like I can like put a brake on it, and get them to slow down, just because it's probably better for them because they're older. But it's an interesting thing to think about with, like, how, if these things were in a vacuum, you would imagine that really the undefined root would always be the one that's getting affected by the definition. But because we have these multifaceted charts and this body too, like Laura was alluding to or saying straightforwardly before, that are all connected and don't exist in a vacuum, we can have these interesting pressurized connections with people, even if I have definition there and I have a consistent access to like my own joy or my own adrenaline or my own cortisol. Other people's behavior around me and the mechanics of it will affect me too. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting conversation.
I just want to say I agree with your conclusion, like, because I think I affect my mother in terms of her emotional or her root center, um, more so than I would my dad or my brother who are emotionally defined. Like, m my brother, if we're like trying to hurry things along and like we have a deadline, he's just like in his own time frame. Like, it doesn't matter if like we're late to something. Or like my dad too, it's like we're late and they're like, oh, let me just go take a quick shower. And like we end up being ridiculously late because they don't have like they have this lower emotional, like their mood affects the pressure that they have to do something or not. Whereas like my mom, it's the splenic root. And if I like ask her for something, like she'll try to do it right away. And like I try to tell her, like, I don't need this right now. Like just like when you have a moment. But like her response again, she's like sacral. So like maybe she has the energy to respond to things that I ask of her right away. But she asks things of me. And like I said, like when I'm in the public house space, I get so antsy and so like frazzled with like everything that has to get done that I'm like much more productive. But like when I'm by myself in my own room, it's much more quieter, that root pressure. And so like she'll ask me to do something and I forget and like I won't do it. And then I just like feel like there's the judgment, the not self-judgment, like you're not doing what she asked of you, or you're not being a good person, or you're not helping out when you should be this or that. Like there's so many things that I forget just because like in on my own, I don't have that pressure of like this needs to get done. Um, for things that like she needs to get done. But like if I'm over there with her, then yes, I'll feel it and amplify it. But like by myself, not as much. Which is why I spend most of my time alone in my bedroom with like doors closed and curtains closed, just like in my own little bubble. Um, but something else I wanted to say that I forgot about, I can't remember. There's something else. I don't know
Okay,
what it was.
I have something. Hopefully you remember while I go. It was the other thing that, what you just said made me think about is that when you're open there, you're amplifying the not self to like the not self ickiness of like the communal root. And so there's that quality of, even if somebody is defined in their root, they can still be unhealthy in that definition, and then you're amplifying their dysfunction, right? And so it may feel worse, generally speaking, or not necessarily worse, but more full-bodied, icky for someone who is going from like root center definition to no root center definition, or going from being undefined to being defined. And this is true for all of the centers, just as an aside. Like, for an example, if I was around a healthy ego, I feel like me amplifying that energy would be maybe a good feeling thing. But because there's so much unhealthy, not self-defined egos out there, the amplification of it feels worse. And that's probably also true for people who are undefined in the root, that there's so much not self root stuff going on that being around other people and all of their dysfunction and dis-ease and highly stressed lifestyles can really feel uncomfortable. Do you remember what you were going to say?
No,
No.
maybe there wasn't. Maybe I imagined there being something else.
Okay. But yeah, that was just something that came to me uh because I think that, when you talk and you've often talked, it's kind of like this feeling of wanting to escape from this overwhelming pressure. And I wonder if those people were, as Martin Grassinger said, still and calm and joyous and in states of gratitude, depending on what they have defined, and only really fighting when their integrity of their individuality is really on the line. If that wouldn't feel good to be around those people, as opposed to people who are running around with their root center, not really being conscious of the energy that they're putting out, and using the because he also talked about how stress and cortisol, like, that is a dysfunction, that is not a rule, like, that's not something that when we're in it habitually, that's obviously a dysfunction. We're not supposed to be habitually in cortisol. At least that the particular stress related one. I know that there's a lot of different names for different types of, I guess, nuances of chemicals that the body makes. So there may be multiple different kinds of cortisol, but when we have a lot of it over time, that's not healthy. And I would argue that probably a lot of America is running on that kind of cortisol. So yeah, my heart goes out to myself, because it's stressful to be in a dysfunctional root situation, because it creates so much fear in the body and anxiety all the time, nonstop. But then also for the open roots, because you're amplifying the collective quality that's really dysfunctional right now. And um, I mean, strategy and authority. I'm like, the more I fall into human design, the more difficult it is for me to fully fathom what it takes to actually follow strategy and authority, especially given this conversation, because when your mind co-ops the chemicals in your body, it becomes so difficult to just sit still and not do things. So it's like a long unraveling, unlearning process that we go through to get to strategy and authority in a real way. But I guess every drop in the bucket counts. Is there anything else that you want to talk about with the root center, Laura?
I remembered there was something that came back to me.
Okay.
Um, when I graduated college, like, okay, when I was in college, I was living in Boston. So I was in my not self, homogenized state, pretending I had a root center and all these motors that I didn't really have. And so I took that with me when I moved here, and I was like surrounded by all these root centers. And like I was in like chronic fight or flight stress response state. And it took a long time for me to like settle into my body. So like before I even started deconditioning takes a long time, and like I was like in a nervous chaotic state for a while, and I forgot what I wanted to say about that, but just that's like came to mind. Like I wasn't always peaceful. I mean, not that I'm peaceful now, like my nervous state is not happy now, but at least today, but like I wasn't always um able to recognize it for what it was, obviously, because like we don't come across human design, we don't know how we're supposed to be because we
Yeah.
think we are or not self. But there was something else now, a second piece, and I don't think I remember what it was. So there was. No, I can't remember it. Shoot.
Okay. Well, no, I mean, I think that we did a pretty good treatment of the root. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that we want to talk about, that we want to touch on, that we didn't get to.
Well, there was a second ago, but not anymore.
There's something floating around in the ethers. I just pulled up the regular body chart because I wanted
Yeah,
to put it into perspective with the rest of. So we were just looking at the root center down at the bottom. Right now we have the 39th gate, obstruction, the 38th gate, opposition, and the 60th gate, which is limitation.
limitation.
Fun times in the
All
root.
all individual circuitry, therefore inducive of melancholy. The 38th gate is the melancholy of not knowing what to fight for. 39th gate, I don't remember what melancholy that is. Something about moodiness, I'm guessing. And the 60th
Not
gate,
having
60th.
spirit.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah.
Being low in spirits. And 60th gate is the gate that nothing's changing, right? Or is that three? I
No,
forget which
that's
ones.
60. That's this. Well, yeah, the 60th is, yeah, it's not, nothing's changing. The three is always changing. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I just wanted to pull this up because, well, it's a good time to talk about the root because we got 39 and 38
Yeah.
active. And we have Pluto back in 60. So this is a very rooty time of year, if I do say so myself. And the 38th and 39th energy can come off as really, well, the 39th is very provocative, and obviously the 38 is the fighter. So this can come off as very provocative energy. We can feel provoked. Oh yeah, happy full moon. Happy full moon too. I'm sorry, new moon in the 39. So very provocative, but yeah, I just wanted to show everyone that's a conversation probably for another time, but I just wanted to show everyone the full body chart. Even though the root's not defined right now, it sits right at the bottom of the 9 centers, and I believe it's more associated with like the bottom of the spine. So yeah, okay, cool. Well,
Quickly,
go ahead.
something else came up, not what I was not able to remember before, but my fifth line wants to share some practicality, which is like if you're not sure if your root center is happy, take some adaptogenic herbs like ashwagandha, astragalus, rhodiola, things that help with the stress response long term. If you're like me and you're a bundle of frazzled nerves today, take Nervines, which I have in my cup of tea that I've been sipping on, like chamomile, lemon balm. Um, I can't remember the others. They're a bunch of skull cap. I don't know what they are off the top of my head.
Nettle.
Nettle's not a nervine.
Oh, it isn't? Okay. Well, it helps my adrenals. Um, it may not
Well,
be
it
in
helps with
between.
kidney function, so maybe that's why.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Mullein?
take
Is mullein a nervine? Sorry.
pollen.
Mullein.
A mullein. No, mullein is more for your lungs.
Okay, never mind.
You can just ask me one by one and I can say it.
I
Let's
can
go
just
through
shoot
all the
out
herbs
just
right
looking at
now.
my basket of herbs. Yeah.
What did I put in my
Rhodiola?
tea? I said rhodiola is an adaptogenic, so it helps you deal
Okay.
with your stress response rather than like your nervous system being amplified in the moment. But yeah, like lemon balm, skullcap, chamomile. I think hyssop is one. Um, I made tea. I already forgot what I put in my tea. Like I put other things in my tea, and I don't know what I did. So
I
that's what
like,
happens. Sometimes your nerves are in a state and you can't do anything about it. That's okay.
well, that's perfect though for this episode. So just to reiterate, really good. You said nervines
Oh,
for the
also
fruit.
don't fast. Yeah, look up nervines herbalism on Google. Like Google has all the answers. Now it has AI answers, which sucks, but nervines for like in the moment your nervous system is stressed the F out. Um, and then adaptogenic herbs for dealing with stress long term, which most of us deal with living in our world as it is today with rising inflation rates, and 54 being like, let's support the tribe. Oh no, we can't because we can't afford anything anymore. Um, but also one last thing, what was it? There was something in my brain. Oh, don't fast. And like, well, maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't, but like blood sugar levels, not having sugar in your blood is going to tell your cortisol to spike. And so like doing intermittent fasting is not supportive or conducive for healthy hormones in terms of your adrenal glands. And so like I feel like everyone's like all on board with the intermittent fasting thing of wanting to lose weight and this and that, where it was really popular at least some years ago, and it's not necessarily helpful for dealing with stress. So like if you're stressed, don't fast, like eat regular meals, wholesome, multifaceted meals, like not just chips.
Or even
So
little snacks, here and there to like keep your
Yeah.
blood sugar level. Yeah, those
Yeah.
were some of the adrenal advice, the adrenal gland advice that I got too. Um, okay, that was all really good. And I think we gave everyone a lot to think about in terms of the root. And none of it was planned I mean, the only thing that was planned was we were going to talk about the root. So this is the facts of life here over here. Um, all right, well, then we will talk to you guys next time. As always, you can follow us on YouTube. This is a live video. Well, it's not going to be live when we post it, but we are on camera. So you can watch us on YouTube at the Projector Stories Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at Projector Stories. You can find us on Facebook at the Projector Stories. And yeah, any of those places you can subscribe, all of that jazz if you are into it. And we're going to come out, I believe, with the rest of the centers if energy, time, authority allows.
In no particular order, mind you. No structure here with order.
Yeah, we're not doing it. Okay, sweet.
Thank you for listening, everyone, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
Bye.